Welcome back to the KTP podcast, the show where we explore careers, insights, and everything in between. Each episode, we tackle a new topic to help you grow, learn, and stay ahead of your professional journey. Let's jump right into it. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining us. We just wanted to ask you a couple of questions about your experience in BUCS, some of the activities you were involved in over the years, and what your career path looks like to end up in the position as a product manager.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. Like, super excited to get to share my experiences with BUCS and with my career with you and your viewers. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rebecca Chen, and I am currently a product manager for Okta / Auth0, currently based in Vancouver, and I was a BUCS student from 2015 to 2020. So for BUCS students, there have traditionally been a couple of really clear career options to go with that naturally stem from the classes that we take across CS and business and leverage the skills that we hone through going through the BUCS program. So you either go into pure software engineering if you really love coding and development, actually building out programs directly, or you can go into tech consulting or management consulting if you quote unquote love to solve big problems. Or you can become a PM, which is often described to be the greatest intersection of business and technology that you can get in a position. Because of family, friends, and other reasons, I made the conscious decision back in 2018, 2019-ish to stay in Vancouver at least immediately after grad. And back then in pre-COVID times, there were not that many good opportunities for new grad PMs or early career PMs based out of Vancouver. You really needed to move to the States for the very few tech companies that offered these APM programs or hired for new grad PMs. It's nice now that post-COVID, now that we have more remote jobs, but specifically there are a lot more remote PM jobs and also more opportunities for junior PMs to work remotely out of Vancouver. But back then, when I graduated, or around the time I graduated, there weren't. So I decided to do tech consulting first, hoping that I would get opportunities and experiences in some of the transferable skills through tech consulting, and then try to shift into PM after that, which I thankfully successfully did after a couple of years.
Entering UBC must have been some time ago, and just wondering, why did you decide to study BUCS?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think throwing it back all the way to high school, I'd always been into sciences mainly because of how logical and analytical, and it's like there's a right or wrong answer for everything. But at the same time, I didn't want to be a doctor, which at the time I thought was the only outcome for if you wanted to go into sciences. So I took a CS course, like a little intro to CS course in high school where we were using JavaScript, I think, to make little arcade games or whatnot. And so I thought that was pretty fun. And at the same time, my cousins are like 8 and 12 years older than me, and they both landed in tech companies after studying non-business or eng backgrounds. So they really encouraged me to strongly consider software engineering or computer science as a career. So at the time I applied for CS at Waterloo, at U of T, and then also at UBC, but I wanted to apply for the business program at UBC because I'm definitely a people person. I have always known this, and I just love yapping to people and working together with other people. I did my first case comp in grade 11 or something like that, and I really enjoyed the process of working with other people to solve a problem. So when I got into U of T, Waterloo, and UBC, I was I kind of not sure if I wanted to dive head first deep down into full CS at Waterloo or whatnot. So the UBC BUCS program, which was a drop down at the time, you didn't actually have to apply for it, but it was oh, you could do this business and computer science combined program. I decided to go with UBC. I'm kind of aware that there's a Waterloo and Laurier mixed program as well that's a little bit similar to BUCS, but I think at the time the application was really strenuous. You got to do all this extra work and this interview and whatnot. So I was a bit maybe I'll just see if I can get into the UBC one, and then I'll just go there if I decide to go down the CS path.
Did you grow up in Vancouver at all? Or do you think that maybe had a bit of a bias on your decision as well?
Oh no, for sure. I did grow up in Richmond, in Vancouver. And I think that there's multiple reasons. One, my family's here, so it's nice to have family nearby. But also secondly, because UBC is way cheaper than the other schools. And being able to be near family is also makes it cheaper to stay at UBC. And I wasn't too convinced of the benefit of moving to U of T and like spending all that time and effort compared to getting the experience at UBC. So I thought that the cost benefit was like negligible. So I ended up staying in Vancouver. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for pointing those out. I think that's really, really important for incoming students to know about as well. Things to consider.
Yeah.
What does your current career path look like to become product manager at Okta?
So I think the first time I worked in a product-ish role was my first internship, which was at TD, and it was in Toronto. So it was like my first foray into living kind of by myself in a completely new city. And the team that I was on was digital capabilities, and the group worked on technologies like an AI chatbot, which is kind of considered emerging technology at the time or unproven new technology. And they also own the consumer facing banking app like TD MySpend, which some people who bank with TD might still actually use. So that was the first time I worked with a team of product managers and got to see how they work. And I did mostly like research and analytics work for them. So I think this role in general, it didn't really help me so much understand or know that I want to do product management work, but it's more like I realized I like to be involved in building some sort of systems that end users would actually be using. Because prior to this, I was working part-time at TD in the branch, and I thought it was really interesting to go for a full circle and bring kind of frontline experience and anecdotes from like customers of the bank into my experience in corporate, being kind of involved in the decision making of what new features or new capabilities would be released to people. So I thought that was kind of my takeaway. So after that, I worked like a couple years in tech consulting, and I was part of systems integration, which is not like the Deloitte digital kind of wing of consulting. So not really like the product side of consulting, but I had a lot of positions like QA analyst, business systems analyst, product analyst. And I wrote a lot and worked a lot with requirements, both functional and technical, to build out these operational systems and processes and customer facing portals, among some other things. So there's a lot of really good transferable skills that I got from my role in Deloitte, which I am really appreciative of. But over the years, Deloitte kind of became a bit too comfortable for me, which is good and bad. I had like made a bit of a name for myself for being a pretty reliable junior, like throw me on any project and I'll just do whatever you need to get it pushed out. And I had great leadership too, but I felt like there was something missing. Like I feel like after 2 or 3 years, I needed to push myself to do something more challenging and that I knew I might not be good at, but then at least I would learn from it. So then I was like, okay, might be the chance to start looking elsewhere to try to shift into product. So yeah, during 2022, during the Great Resignation, I found an opportunity like online through LinkedIn for some product roles, and I ended up joining Wish's product team. So I was hired as a product strategy and operations manager, whatever that means, basically supporting a team of product managers. So I had like taken it as a bit of a meme at the time because of the name of Wish itself, but the role was perfect. It was like smart experience product managers, a consumer facing app experience. I love shopping. Like, let's kind of take this opportunity to learn. So shortly starting after Wish as a product operations and strategy manager, there was opportunity to take on more product manager duties. And there was also some layoffs. So I ended up getting like 2 full product managers pipelines like shifted towards me, and I became an official product role. So that was kind of how I managed to finesse myself into an official product role, because I find that it might be a bit difficult for people who have never had a full product manager title on their resume to be recognized or given opportunities in product, because it can be a bit of elusive elitist attitude for the role itself in some of these companies. So yeah, that's kind of how I eventually actually got into product.
Just to follow up from me on that, I was just curious because you had so much like technical experience before, digital consulting, you've done like, for Deloitte as well. So I was just wondering if that technical experience was quite like not necessarily a requirement, but if that really helped you become a better PM.
Little bit of a disclaimer. I actually have never worked as a developer officially for any company. So I do not, and I cannot claim that I am a technical person. But what I do tell people is that I do have the basics of understanding of CS. If it ever need be in my job, I would be able to study up and understand. Like, for example, for my current role, I think I needed to learn a bit of Python and JavaScript. So I've been doing a bit of a refresher course. So it's enough to get by in understanding kind of what engineers are talking about. And also from a system perspective, it really helps me understand like architecture and like system diagrams. The experience that I had learning BUCS really helped me do that. Versus if you were just straight business, or even if you're just BTM, I think you would have a little bit harder time getting on board and understanding anything to do with the code or system diagrams or architecture. I, again, have not worked as a developer. I wish I had actually. I wish I did like an internship. It just wasn't in the stars for me. But definitely I can say that the things that I learned in my CS courses and UBC may not have directly like helped me in my job, but the kind of created a baseline where it's easier for me to ramp up and understand things that are more technical, for sure.
No, that definitely makes sense. And just curious about that as well. I was just wondering, like, was there a particular reason you wanted to do product like even later on? And even though being in BUCS, like how come you never maybe leaned towards doing a more like developer role previously? Just curious about that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think back when I was in school, you'll find people on one side of the fence or another. And then my side of the fence was that I hate coding. I did not understand. Okay, you know what? Let me take a step back. I don't think I hate coding. I think I just, those like algorithms courses just like scarred me for life. Like
221.
comp sci, yeah, like 221, comp sci 3.
For sure.
Oh my God, 121. Those courses literally scarred me. Oh my God, like I don't think I'm like a genius, but I think I'm like, I feel like I'm intelligent. Like I can figure things out, right? But man, those algorithms courses, it's like no matter how much I like studied, it just didn't click for me. So then eventually I just accepted it. I was like, you know what, like this, my friend is getting like a 90 in this class and he just suddenly understands everything. It's just not possible for me, no matter how much I study. It's not like a thing that you can just like brute force study and understand. Like it has to click in your brain.
Of course.
So I think because of that, I was like, oh, I'll do my first internship in like a non-software engineering role to give myself a bit more time to like build up my skill set and like leak code and whatnot. But because I had like gotten the job at Deloitte and it was like an 8-month thing, and then it was like close to graduation, I didn't want to extend grad another half a year because I did 5 years total. I didn't want to extend another half year to do like a software engineering internship. So it wasn't in the stars for me. I also thought that maybe I'd be able to do some developer work at Deloitte because in systems engineering for Deloitte, there are a lot of engineers. Like one of my closest coworkers, same service line, same tenor, he was a developer for some projects. So I was like, oh, maybe I can do the work and then ramp up as a developer from a project, but that also never happened. So I was like, it's okay. I can be a non-developer, but also work in the tech industry, no problem.
Oh, yeah, I feel like nowadays talking to like some younger BUCS kids, it seems like a lot of them want to try and skip the developer step altogether. But
Yes.
do you think, from your experience at UBC, like through all these computer science courses, like which ones do you think were the most relevant to like a day-to-day job of a PM?
There were some upper level BTM courses that were really helpful in kind of that big picture thinking of like, what is a company's goals and what are they trying to do? And then if you understand that a bit better, it's easier for you to be an individual contributor. So some of these senior courses, I think, were like CIO strategies, information systems, like these upper level courses, I think were actually pretty useful. Some people will say they're a bit fluffy, but I feel like as a PM, it's important to have that big picture understanding of what the goals of the company are, and then funnel that down to actually what you're building and what the team, how the team is building it. I think it's important as a good PM. So I thought those courses were pretty helpful. In terms of like the CS courses that were helpful, I think database is actually helpful as a PM because not every PM role, there's some more like proper PM roles, what I call, and more like iffy PM roles that are more PM entitled than the work that they do. But for proper PM roles, you need to be able to work with data. And those like SQL classes, database classes can really help with understanding how your company manages data, and you will be able to better leverage insights from the data if you have some understanding of like SQL and how databases work. So I think those are probably like the most important thing. Definitely not those algorithm courses. Don't think that has any help for PM career.
I can relate to that.
But I also think there was like a comp sci 210 or something where we were using like APIs. We were like setting up RESTful APIs or something like that. I feel like that also is a little bit helpful because I think a lot of tech nowadays is API first thinking. So having a little bit of that basics, it's like, oh, I've heard of that before. Like I've tested that before. So that also kind of helped a little bit.
Just curious on your opinion, like where do you see the role of product management evolving in the next couple of years? Like, with introduction of AI into every company, they're all buying up all the latest APIs, and with the release of like GPT-4o, like there's so many things that are going to be changing. Like
there is definitely a huge trend nowadays. Like, oh, as a PM going forward, you need to be able to understand how to work with and leverage AI in your products. So I definitely think that's going to be the biggest kind of shift in the coming years for sure. I guess it's something that I myself even need to look into. But as a kind of early stage career PM, I guess I'm still like 2 years-ish, less than 2 years-ish into PM work. It's not something that I'm immediately focusing on. But yeah, AI, definitely big
Yeah,
thing.
it's definitely going to be something to talk about, we feel, going ahead. But just curious, in your 2 years, working as a PM, what are some of the biggest challenges you faced? Maybe with handling different people, handling different departments all the time, talking to business people and the developers. Like, what do you feel about the biggest challenges you've had?
I think there's a lot to the PM job. You kind of have to think about it as you're sitting in the middle of all these different stakeholders and you need to mobilize them all in order to get your work done. So by mobilizing other stakeholders, I mean like engineering team, other teams product that is like dependent on yours or has dependencies, design, data, architecture. You gotta like work with everyone pretty much across the board to get your project out there. So there's a lot of challenges with mobilizing people because as a PM, you're never like managing any of these people. You're not anyone's direct, like no one's reporting to you, but you at the same time need to influence these people to work on what you want them to work for in your product. So influencing without authority is definitely a skill that PM should have, but it's very difficult, especially as a more junior person. So that's one thing. Some things that you can probably pay closer attention on to try to be better at influencing without authority is kind of building up your interpersonal skills. You want to kind of create a good connection with everyone that you need to work with, because then it makes it easier to mobilize everyone when you need to. And that comes with like being able to listen and understand and negotiate with all of your people that you got to work with. And also the second thing is like making sure that you have a good understanding of the end goal, because that's what is going to drive the project forward through all the muddled conversations that people getting into the weeds and analyzing things that may not be that important in the end. Being a PM who can understand like the end goal of what you're trying to achieve and how that relates to the company's goals is going to help you influence without authority and manage all these stakeholders without having direct ability to tell them what to do. But I think going back to your question, I think one of the biggest challenges I faced is having constantly changing priorities. And I think this is more prevalent for smaller companies. So Wish was around 1,000 people. I feel like Wish was also constantly on fire because of the state of the stock and the balance sheet, but top-down leadership keeps making different changes like quarter to quarter. And maybe I lock down something to work on for the Eng team for the next 4 months, but then suddenly 2 months in, they're like, we don't need this anymore. We need something else. That's probably the most difficult thing you need to do as a PM, because you need to get all the ducks in a row to get a project done. If you have to undo that and like restart that in the middle of a cycle, not only do you have to make it clear what you're doing instead of what you were originally doing, you have to mobilize and influence everyone else to be like, this is why we need to stop this, and this is why we need to do this now. So that is probably the biggest challenge that I have faced as a PM, and might be more prevalent and understandable from PMs that have worked for smaller startups. I think larger corporations is not as big of an issue.
No, for sure. That's definitely valuable for sharing. Just on that note, what do you think is the main learning experience you've had as a PM so far? If I had to say the one major thing you've learned from transitioning from especially tech consulting to product, apart from the hike in compensation, just curious as to what do you think is the most valuable learning experience you've had?
So there's so many like typical things I could say, or straight or like very more obvious things, I guess. It's like now I learn everything that it takes to push an idea from conception all the way to delivery. It's not as simple as how we might write it in our like case competitions. Like there's a lot of things you need to consider And it also differs between different companies. So even if you know how to deliver for one company, it could be different, or there's very nuanced differences between like the tech stacks of different company and the teams that you need to get involved. So that's kind of my more boring response, as like I've learned as a product manager now everything that needs to be done to actually get things out the door. But I think the most valuable lesson I've learned is that you should never take anything personally in the workplace. You're working with so many different stakeholders, engineering managers, engineers, principal product managers, like people who are way more senior, way more experienced than you, product managers from other teams that have their own priorities and things that they care about. Sometimes things can get a bit dicey in terms of like too many cooks in the kitchen, too many opinions. How do we end up doing this? Blame when things end up changing last minute or something doesn't get pushed out the way that everyone thought there would be. It can get a bit like hectic, but as like a product manager, you should always like stay calm and try to play the peacemaker, and also never take anything that anyone says personally, because I think it can get really stressful and you can get really overwhelmed having to deal with all these people. But if you remember that everyone is trying to hit their own goals and their goals might be different than yours, then you can start to like empathize and be like, okay, I understand why this person is acting like this or why they're pushing back. It's not personal. We just all want to work together to get something out in the end. So that's probably the biggest thing I've learned.
If you had to go through the journey of becoming a PM again, how would you do it from scratch?
It's a really good question. I mentioned a bit about how in Vancouver back in 2019, 2020, there were not as many opportunities to go directly into like a proper PM role out of grad. It was also very competitive. There's like, you're vying for these APM spots with like Ivy League kids from the States and people from like top universities. So I think like back then it was more difficult. If I had to redo things now, I definitely would, number one, try to get some software eng experience under my belt and not be so intimidated by the algorithms type of work. Because in like a proper work setting, and you guys might know this if you worked as a dev, and people listening to this probably know this, it's not the same as working in those algorithm classes. Like you don't need to understand those concepts. Like you just need to know kind of how to read the code, like how things link together, and then you'll work on a small piece and then you'll have the team helping and supporting you. So I think if I'd realized that earlier, I would have done a software eng position, and then it would have made me feel much more confident when talking with engineers to be like, I've done this before and I can kind of talk like this. And the second thing is I would have tried to get into an APM program earlier in my career. I don't regret my tech consulting experience, but I think that now that I know that I want to do PM and I feel like this is the space where I really enjoy and thrive in, it would have been nice to have been here earlier and kind of known that through my undergrad. Then I would have started building up the skill sets of like, what does a PM do? Like, what skill sets do I need to be a good PM? Like, how do I get into these APM programs? I would have started thinking about this earlier rather than kind of doing like a little bit of a detour through tech consulting, which again, I don't regret where I am right now, but if I had to do it again with what I knew right now, I would do that. The third thing is there's a difference between PM positions at these larger tech companies or more proper tech companies and companies like banks or the older companies. The flavor is a little bit different, less data driven and more requirements driven. And I think that understanding this distinction and being selective into like what PM role to get into or APM program to get to would also be helpful if I had known this back then. I didn't realize this until going through the last 3 experiences I had. I realized I was like, okay, this company's PM title and this job description is like, they say it's a PM job, but it's not the proper PM role that you'd think of where you're managing a product from 0 to 100.
There's not that many resources out there on like how to actually become a PM. Going back to your time as a student, we were wondering what were some things you did to have fun in university? BUCS is such a draining program.
Yeah, I feel like I got so into the weeds in school. I was definitely drinking that Kool-Aid, solder Kool-Aid, CS Kool-Aid. I was like, I gotta do all these things to help my resume to get into these jobs, like yada yada. So I regret to say that I didn't do things like exercise or like find other hobbies during university. I feel like I found them after I left university. I had more time to like have a midlife or quarter life crisis and be like, I don't have any hobbies. Like all I do is work, and no one cares about like no one cares about like what you do during work. Like when they're asking you about yourself, they want to know like about you, right? So that's like a bit after, but I think during uni, like I said, I was involved in like clubs where I feel like it was really good to build those soft skills in like a non-work setting. But I also TA'd a lot in university, and I feel like I really enjoyed TAing because it helped build my confidence as a person. Because you have students asking you all these questions, and then maybe sometimes you don't 100% know the answer, but you got to figure it out and you got to explain it to them, right? And then once you actually explain it to them, they understand, then it's like a really good feeling because you feel like you've helped them, but also you feel confident. It's like, I understand this and I can explain this to someone. So I always encourage people, if they're interested at all, to find those TAing opportunities. I also managed to build some good connections with some really good process to build like a connection with and learn from. So yeah, that's kind of what I did. I know it's so lame. It sounds like I didn't do anything fun.
No, not myself. I've TA'd like about 7 or 8 courses, and I
Yeah.
understand that. Like TAing, it was in the beginning, it was very nervous because you have to like
Yeah.
kind of deal with students without the prof being there. It's like if you say something wrong, everyone thinks like, okay, maybe this guy is not that smart. But then
Yeah.
later on, you realize that you got to handle that things, and that's part of the job.
I feel like I was giving back at the same time. I was also like helping myself like be more confident
For
as a
sure.
speaker. So it was great. But okay, let me just say one fun thing. I think being able to get lunch with my friends like every day,
So valuable.
impromptu, was like the best thing ever. I miss it so much. BUCS is such a hard degree. It feels extra better to be able to decompress with people who understand what you're going through. And nowadays, you guys are graduating soon. I'm like I feel so old. Um, but like nowadays, it's like you have to book time with people like 3 or 4 months in advance. It's like, hey, are you free like in the next 3 weeks? And then you see them like once every couple months. Like, I
And
have
that's it for
someone who I
today.
meet with
Thank
like
you for
once
listening
every
to our
year or something.
episode,
But it's
and we'll
like
catch you at
friends
the
I used
next
to
one.
see like every day, and I'm very like outgoing. I go out of my way to like try to make time because I enjoy talking to people and I enjoy like having fun with people. But even for me, some people I don't catch up with unless it's like 3, 4, 5 months. So I really miss like seeing people at school and being like, hey, you want to grab lunch? You want to chill? You want to sit? I really miss that. So appreciate it while you can, I guess. You can always go to grad school, but I think it's a little different, right? Undergrad's just like everyone's doesn't, most people don't know what they're doing, so you're just kind of going through it together.
Not so different. That's definitely relatable, I think, for both of us.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I'm again curious, actually. How many late night study sessions have you had with your Bucks people? Like,
The amount of times that I've had friends crash course a course for me before exam
yeah,
day is
yeah.
unfortunately more than I can count on one hand. Like I think I had a friend who I think he taught me like 213 or something like that. Like the night before the exam, and I somehow like passed, and I was like, this is crazy. Like it's happened a lot, like for sure. Those late nights with the whiteboard trying to figure out like how to code in assembly or something like that. Like it was definitely a lot of those nights, and you look back on it fondly. It was definitely a struggle at the time, back to back exams, all these things you don't understand, you got to figure out. So that's why it's nice. BUCS is a small like classroom size. You're always going to find people to lean on and work together with.
Kind of just wrapping everything up, if you were to give one piece of advice to yourself, first entering UBC, what would it be?
Be more confident, I think. People who are more confident get more opportunities given to them. It's hard to be confident when you feel like you don't have kind of things to be confident about, but I think you really have to adopt the fake it till you make it mentality because there's a lot of opportunities that you might miss just because you feel like you're not good enough or you're embarrassed. I definitely feel like it held me back for the first 3 years out of my 5-year degree until I started TAing more and like building up my confidence. So I think that's probably the one thing I would say to my first year self, other than like enjoy it while I can, because 5 years seems like a long time, but it goes by like in the blink of an eye.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's very valuable piece of advice at the end of the day. Thank you so much for sharing. That pretty much wraps up our episode.
Thanks for having me on the show. I enjoyed reminiscing a little bit.
Thank you so much for your time as well.